Be sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network? Welcome to Afternoons with Ed. Here's your host, Ed King.
Good afternoon, and I hope you're having as good a day as I am. I can't say anything exciting has happened yet today, but a little incident happened early this morning, which I'll talk about. I critiqued last week's show, and not because I'm in love with my own voice, but I wanted to see if I was making any drastic mistakes. And the one thing I found out is I'm using the phrase, "it's interesting," way too much. I've eliminated a couple other bad phrases in the past. They're phrases I've used too much. And then also there was one thing where I absolutely repeated myself on one subject. First, I said it first at the beginning and then later. I'm going to give you a little review of this week and what's happened. My wife's operation was a week ago yesterday, and they had her up walking the next day. And that's going to bring me into another subject a little later on. She's at the Springs at rehab for, I think it's 2 weeks. Maybe it's a little bit longer. One of the things that's interesting is, and this is going to relate to my wife's operation, is this one-upmanship that I used to do this all the time myself, and I've tried to keep myself from ever doing it anymore, but no matter what you bring up, if you say you've had a bad experience at the bank, let me tell you about what happened to me. I said to somebody, I was talking to a group of people, and I said, I said, my wife was operated on Friday, and they had her up walking on Saturday. And someone said, well, I know so-and-so, and he had both knees operated at the same time. He's up walking the next day. Well, yeah, sure. This goes on and on and on. I can't believe it. The only guy I know that ever had both knees operated at the same time, it took him a year to recuperate. I mean, he was in terrible shape. So what are you going to do, huh? I've been reading a love story by Nicholas Sparks. I can't remember. I just finished it. I get your tone. It's a feel-good book, but it's kind of interesting because I've done a little writing. I'm not a professional writer. I've never had anything published, but I used to enjoy writing stuff, and I would get to a point where I'd get tired of the story myself, or I didn't know where I was going to go, so I'd give it an abrupt O. Henry type ending. And I noticed that Nicholas Sparks, mostly from the movies that he's made, one of them was the Notebook, and it looked to me the book was excellent, and it was very interesting. But the end, he just kind of cuts it off, and bang, it's over with, and you don't expect the ending it wasn't ironic or anything. It just was a kind of a blah ending. Expected more from the rest of the book. Now, I'm talking about somebody else instead of myself, and that's not always the best thing to do, is take somebody else's inventory. But I know I've in the past I've had the same problem. Last week I talked a little bit about my favorite authors, and one of them is Truman Capote, and I failed to say a little bit more about that. His first book, Other Voices, Other Rooms, I think it was, it's more like a stringing together of some vignettes or short stories more than it is a novel. But the most beautiful thing I have ever read in my life is a short book that he wrote, and it's called His Christmas Story. And if this book doesn't bring tears to your eyes, I don't know what will, but it is just a a beautiful, beautiful book. I recommend it highly. It's called Christmas Story. There are two stories. They're like, one is the Thanksgiving story, which I didn't care that much for. It was okay, but the Christmas story is fantastic in my way of thinking anyway. I was going to talk about, I don't know what, I can talk about a lot of things, but the easiest thing is to kind of focus on myself and talk about things. I don't like to be telling success stories about myself, and I'm going to try not to do that, but I'm going to tell you I've had some weird jobs. When I was in college, I had a job as a night watchman in a cemetery. Now, I don't care how unsuperstitious you are, that is kind of a scary place. I had to go around, make the rounds once an hour, and try and get a little nap time in between, but it never worked out quite that well. There was one night when they brought two people they disinterred, and they brought them up, and they had a building where they used to put people in while they were waiting to bury them, and these people, why they brought the coffins in the garage where I stayed between rounds, and I stayed out in the car outside the garage all night. And another job I had was driving a cab. It didn't last too long because I wrecked the cab, and it was my fault. So that kind of ended that job in a hurry. I've always been fascinated with old cars, and I was trying to get on a month's free thing of Netflix on the computer the other day, and they asked me what was the first car I ever owned. And of course, I put down a Ford convertible coupe, which was the first car I ever owned. I think I talked about this a little bit in one of the other segments. At this point, I was still in college in my freshman year, first semester, and I got a job as an usher in a movie theater, and the most I could earn if they used me, the most they could use me was I had earnings of about potential earnings of about $7.50 a week. Well, there was a fellow lived down actually there's an alley ran behind our house, and he lived down at the other end of the alley, another street, and his sister's boyfriend gave him this Ford V8 convertible coupe, and it wasn't running, but he said it would run. It just needed the battery charged, and so I agreed to pay him $20 for it, and I was to make $5 a week payments. And I made 3 payments, and then found out that we could not get the car running for less than $40. I don't know how we got a mechanic to come and look at it, but in those days, I think guys a little more peripatetic than they are now. And even doctors used to make house calls sometimes in those days. But and so I never paid him the last $5, and that was okay with him. He agreed that was fair. And ultimately, I sold it to a junk dealer. It never ran, and I sold it to a junk dealer. It was the beginning of the war period. This is 1940, and into 1940. And I ended up selling it to a junk man for $25. Now, if I had that car, it'd be worth a lot of money. But also, if I take the $15 and put it in the bank, that would have gone exponentially the same way as the car appreciated over the years. I don't know if anybody finds this kind of stuff. It's all interesting, but it's what I know when I talk. And so when they first rejected Netflix first rejected the thing about the first car I owned, I said, well, the second car I owned was a Plymouth. And this was an old car that I bought for $75, and it ran good, but the headlights were dim, and it didn't have safety glass in the windows, and one side was bashed in, and I had very little driving experience. The only car I ever, well, I had these friends that let me drive. They taught me how to drive their cars. Everything was stiff shift in those days. So they could sit in the back seat and my date would be in the front seat. Or if maybe I didn't always have a date. I don't know. I don't remember all this stuff, But and then I traded in on a 1936 Oldsmobile, 4-door. It's a nice car, beautiful car, and I had that for a while. And then summer came around, and there's a fellow that was going to be drafted into the Army, and he had this beautiful 1935 4-door convertible sedan. It was called Desert Tan, and it had a white side strip, and it was very modern looking because it even had a clock in the dashboard and had a lot of refinements. And I had that car till after the war. I paid $175 for that one, and meanwhile I'd sold obviously the previous cars. But I sold that car. I paid $175 for it, and I sold it for $375 because there was a ceiling on what you could sell a car for, and you could, things in the cars in those days didn't come along with them, like a heater that was extra, and radio was extra, and of course I had a radio and it had 2 heaters, and because the old Fords were devils to try and heat, and because they had such a large water system, cooling system. I don't know, but I'm still in the old cars. I've presently for 25 years now. I've owned a '74 MGB, and it has appreciated considerably over the years. Except now I got a bad collection. That's a big expenditure, and I don't have the money to do it. So it sounds like I'm doing a little whining there about my financial things, but I had a note here, something about political situations. I think it's interesting because I just do not watch the news anymore. I don't want to hear about all these wrangles and these arguments and the silliness that's going on. One guy said that this going over the fiscal cliff thing was it was just like a national basketball game, a professional basketball game. It all goes down to the last 2 minutes, and I think in most cases that's true. The whole thing is weird. White people are posturing and doing this thing. I did watch some discussion about this, and on Good Morning Joe, which I don't always watch, and I haven't watched for years, but I did watch recently, and they were discussing that situation and the fact that, unfortunately for them, the Republican company have shot themselves in the foot. They just they have nowhere to go. They want to please the National Rifle Association, and on the other hand, apparently the public does not agree with them, and they're afraid to. They don't know what to do. They're kind of between a rock and a hard place. But I'm not going to lament from them because anybody would hire. It's an opinion, and may offend some people. Anybody that would hire Karl Rove to run a campaign, I don't think much of. I was watching. I watch the History Channel a lot, not a lot, but frequently. And they were talking about the Roman Empire, and I got to thinking about it. The Roman Empire lasted for 500 years. And then, of course, we went into the Dark Ages, and it was kind of barbaric and bad time up until the Middle Ages when things started to turn around again. And some good things started to happen, like the Magna Carta and so forth, which was a baby step, but it was a step. And I thought then also about the British Empire. And, they used to say that the sun never sets on the British Empire. And it didn't. But it did now because their empire only lasted for 200 years, and they're a minor power now. So we are at 236 years in the United States. And I don't think I have to worry about the next 200 years. I'm not going to be around. I was talking to my brother-in-law John about this last weekend, and he said, yeah, but I worry about my kids and my grandkids. And I said, well, John, they're going to have to do the same thing we did, is whatever happens, we have to live through it, whether it's World War II or the Big Depression during the 30s. We managed to live through these things. And that's what our future generations are going to have to do. I don't envy them. Believe me, I do not envy them. But there it is. I'm probably saying there it is now all the time. Okay, enough self-criticism. I'm looking at some notes here. I just the first note I just talked about that. They must learn to live life on life's terms and live life whatever life gives you. I had a note here about Plato's Republic for some reason, and I got a large personal library, and I went looking for it the other day, and I can't find it. So I guess I may have to make a trip to the library if I'm going to reread that. There's really nothing new under the sun, and we think that we are so modern today, but to go back to the ancient Greeks and the Romans when they were in their heyday, they had sewer systems. They had flush toilets, believe it or not. They had bidets. They had central heating. They had all sorts of things. And then, of course, I don't know, mankind kind of disintegrated there for a while in the Dark Ages, and then finally brought itself out. Of course, the things that have happened in my lifetime are just amazing. Even more amazing is the things that's happened in my parents' lifetime, and then seeing into mine. When my parents were born in 1884 and 1885, the bicycle hadn't even been invented. There was some telephones, and there was a crude typewriter, and of course we had the telegraph. And we did have railroads. Railroads are fairly new thing. I think they came into existence in popular use around the 1840s, if I recall my history correctly. I don't know, but people. A note here I have says people's opinions are always based on their personal prejudice, and mine included. I don't, I'm prejudiced. I know that. My political views are prejudiced. I know that. Maybe I'm not the greatest student of history, but the history that I've studied, especially during the last 100 years of this country, tells me that the opinions that I've formed are correct. But here, I want my position. I talked about my brother-in-law John. We are so, and I talked about him last week. We are so different. He's a Baptist. He's not fundamentalist, but he's a Baptist. And one of the things he told me that he believes in is reincarnation. That's the afterlife he thinks is. So he isn't, typical Baptist. And I talked last week also about the fact that these churches have gone wild with things. And I made one mistake. I was talking about the cathedral in Cleveland. I said the church downtown. It was actually the diocese headquarters for the Cleveland Diocese. The bishop was there. And the building I was talking about was the old diocese headquarters building. So enough of that. People, I think, in the past were more self-sufficient than they are today. When I was a kid, of course, you had to make do, and I've talked about this in the past. But we had a little interesting experience this morning. We actually started last evening. I was sitting outside waiting for a friend to pick me up and take me somewhere, and because I won't drive at night anymore, and lady and her husband, she just had picked him up sometime yesterday at the Tampa airport from Canada. That's her permanent residence up there. And they were fiddling with the car. I was sitting outside waiting for my friend, and so I go over and I said, what's wrong? You can't get the key out of the lock. So this morning, they're out there going to get the key out of the lock, and tried all different things, and it didn't work. So I went in and I got on the computer, and the first three things the computer told me didn't work. And the fourth one did. I keep going in, see what they said on the computer, and then I'd run back out because it's just walking through my garage. And the answer was, you take a hammer and you tap the head of that key gently. You don't bang on it, you just tap it gently, and the thing came loose. And I was thinking, and I was talking to these new neighbors of mine, and I said, you know, anybody else in this complex would have called the locksmith, because most people today are not self-sufficient. They don't have to do. They hire somebody to do everything. The simplest task. We have a kind of a decorative wall in front of our condos. I live in a villa. It's 2 units under a common roof. It's actually not a common roof, but it's one roof, and part of it's half is mine, half's the neighbors. This wall in front of the thing is a decorative wall. Now mine is covered up on both sides by bushes, so you can't hardly see the thing. But these people, they didn't like the way the painter, the last time they painted the exterior of the place, painted these walls. So they spent, I think, $200, $250 a piece to have these walls painted. Well, you know, if the wall didn't suit me, the paint job on it, I'd just go out and paint it myself. It wouldn't take a half hour. It's not that big. But I don't know. I'm an old curmudgeon. I sound like Andy Rooney here for a minute. Going back to my notes here, I saw an interesting. I saw an interesting, but I didn't finish seeing it because I had to replace the box in my television. I had to take it up to Comcast and trade it in, and of course the stuff I had recorded was lost that way. But there was a program, I guess it was either on one of the PBS channels or the History Channel, I don't remember which, but it was talking about the Buddhism and Hinduism and Jainism and Judaism and Sikhism and Muslim religions, and also, of course, they mentioned in passing the Christian religions. And the point they were making was all of these people worship the same God. So why do we have religious wars? Because somebody says, I got the right idea, and I got the, and you think all of the terrible things, and I know that I'm repeating myself on this one, and I may do it again and again because I think it's so important. Think of the things that we've done in the name of religion. The Crusades, just to name one, and another, the thing that had the senior moment, folks, the thing that happened at in Spain, the Inquisition, and the things that, and burning people at stake, and the witch trials in Salem, in New England, and they didn't burn them; they hung them. But wouldn't it be nice if everybody would say, well, look, I don't care what you believe in. You believe in what you believe in, I'll believe what I believe in. Last week I mentioned the book by the atheist, and I said he suggested people pray. He also suggests they read the Bible as a piece of literature. And I talked about that, and I delve into it a little bit. I'm not, now my wife is into Bible study, and I don't want to study these things because it's like when it's oh, I have a terrible time with losing my train of thought here. Okay, well, let's go to something else. I was in a group of people last week, and we got to talking about denial. And usually denial is about that we deny that we have a addiction or a problem with alcohol or that we have an eating disorder. There's all sorts of things. And I got to thinking about denial, and I said, I'm going home and I'm going to make a denial list. And I deny to myself that I like attention, and I do. I like being on television here. I liked when I did theater. I loved the applause afterwards. I love the spontaneous applause that once in a while you get. I love it, and I can't deny it. So I'm trying to get rid of that one, or the denial of it at least. And I deny sometimes that I've made some drastic mistakes in my life. I've made some dandies. I have made some really stupid mistakes in my life. If I had to do over again, at least some of them I would repeat. I know that because it's a person's nature to do that sort of thing. When I was talking to John about this thing where this one-upsmanship where, well, I can tell you a story better than that. You know, I had a worse experience at the bank than you did, and so forth. He said, it boils down to this: the first liar doesn't have a chance. When I used to encounter when I was in the bar business, which I was in for 5 years, a terrible time of my life, people would say, it's a well-known fact, and they've proved that over at Tell Memorial Institute. You know, of course, there's this silly stuff like, you know, warm water boils or freezes faster than cold water. That's a well-known fact. And, of course, it is not. I saw a thing on somebody was interviewing an author by the name of George Saunders. And one of the things he's written a book that's a bestseller, and I'm not aware of this, and I can't even tell you what the title is, but one of the things that he talked about was the underside to capitalism. You know, capitalism is a great system, but the underside is the homeless. And, of course, here in Sarasota, we are at the nadir of tolerance for homeless people. It's ridiculous. The lengths we'll go. We take away benches out of parks so you can't sleep on them. Who cares if a homeless person sleeps on a bench rather than have to sleep on the ground? I mean, I'd rather provide them with benches, but that's opinions. Another thing, excuse me. Another thing, very briefly. We have the most expensive health care in the world, and we have some of the poorest health care, despite the fact that we spend a ton of money on it. We have more infant mortality than most countries. We have a lower longevity rate than a number of countries, and I think it's a shame that we can't get with the rest of the larger nations, the industrial nations, and have a health care plan. I think in a previous program, and this is my final word, is I mentioned, I'm sure before, watching a travel channel in the travel channel, I can't think of the guy's name, but he was interviewing this couple, and he said, well, your taxes are so high. And the guy said, yeah, but we do not have to worry about the two things that you worry yourself sick about in the United States. One is adequate health care, and the other is retirement. We don't have to worry about those things because through our high taxes, this is taken care of, and we're willing to accept that. I'd be willing to accept that. I have a problem with my finances now simply because last year's expenses, out-of-pocket expenses, which does include insurance premiums, was over $12,000.